Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for putting a bit of time aside this afternoon. I think if my calculations are right, I think most people here today, maybe have a week or so of term three to go before you get a little break. And I know that when that sort of time comes along, and the sort of time of year comes along, but there must be a little temptation on a Thursday afternoon to just go, oh, don't worry about it. But I note a couple of things. I note that I think we've just about, Chris would probably in the background would know better than I, but we probably just about hit our record in terms of registrations for this webinar, and it's possibly, I guess, because we're hitting on a topic that people really want to know about, and it's something that affects everybody, whether you're in a teaching, non-teaching, admin, leadership role within schools. This whole idea of getting parents and schools back onto the same page is something that resonates with people. And I think maybe the second reason we've got so much interest in this is sort of a little bit of combining forces that we've done through this webinar between us at Real Schools and them at SchoolStream. I'll tell you a couple of things about SchoolStream as we're sort of heading along today in the webinar that I think will be of interest to you. But I guess where I'll start is the little nexus between us is that I think that what I know as a school principal is that the message we put out there has got to be we've got to be really careful about that message. We've got to be very clever about that message. We've got to be very clear about what the messages are that we're pumping out into our school communities. Of course, I could be screaming in a tornado, in which case nobody will hear me. So I'm good on message, but the actual means or the channel for delivering that message is something that SchoolStream have done a remarkable job on. And so when we had some conversations about what we might do that would be of use to schools and of value to all of you, it seemed that what we needed to do was to combine to make sure that you got the advantage of the overlap between the message and a wonderful new channel that's available to you to be able to get that message across in a more meaningful kind of way. So today is very much about that whole body of work that we need to do about bringing parents and schools right back onto that same page together. And in doing that, I guess what we need to do first is let's just step back for a moment here and have a look at what's happened. And if you're old like me, you can possibly remember the truly awful daytime television show called Days of Our Lives. And they used to say, like sands through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives. And actually used to have an hourglass on the screen, couldn't find a picture of that, so I used this one instead. So I ponder a fair bit what has happened, what's gone wrong, what's happened while those days have just sort of drifted by without us really stopping and acknowledging the changes that were happening along the way. And I think that one of the really provocative questions that I'm often asking people in schools is, what do you think has changed the most in education in the last 30 years or so? If it's without priming, if it's without being set up to answer the question around the relationship between home and school, then sometimes people, we use or we answer using the usual phrases, the usual topics. We talk about technology, we talk about architecture, we talk about teaching style or learning styles. But for me, I think if we get right, down to the granular level about what's changed the most in schools in the last 30 years, I think for me it is pretty much in a nutshell that 30 years ago, if you got in trouble at school, you got in trouble twice. And what I mean by that is that I certainly remember getting in trouble once at school when I was in year 3. And it was a teacher, this is, I've got to remember, you're going back a really long way now, a teacher who was a really lovely lady, but when she sort of lost it a little bit, she would lift the lid on the wooden desks and ask us to put our hands in there. She wouldn't smash our fingers in the wooden desk, so don't fear about that, and nor am I advocating the breaking of fingers to encourage better behaviour in the classroom. But she would hover the lid just above our fingers and tell us what it is that we've been doing wrong, and then she might let go and the lid would just fall on our hands and give us a little thump, which I thought was an outrageous practice. And I went home to tell my dad what had gone wrong, what had happened to me at school today. expecting that perhaps Dad would, in absolute full agreement with my disgust, run down to the school ranting and raving and defend my honour. I was shocked when all Dad did was look at me and say, yeah, well, you would have been doing something. And I was like, Dad, did you not hear what I said to you? He said, yeah, well, what'd you do? I'm thinking, this is just not on. And the more I've reflected on that over the years, because don't worry, I survived both the experience in class and the lack of support from my father. What I've found over the years in exploring what was going on there was that what that was evidence of was that the partnership between home and school was truly that. It was a partnership. And we're actually prepared to accept some reasonably dodgy things on either end of that partnership to maintain the integrity of that partnership, which was very, very important. Because what it meant was that we actually are prepared as partners to maybe not win every battle, to not agree on everything, but we're going to win the war. And the war is to fight to ensure that I become a decent citizen. And so what we have to ask ourselves is what went wrong? How did that actually change? And it's something that I don't blame schools for. I don't think schools could have seen this coming. And equally, I don't blame parents for it. Now, there is a temptation to blame parents for this situation, and I want us to be very careful about that, because I don't think any parent sends their kid to school thinking, what I'm going to do is send this kid to school so that I can pick a fight and become adversarial with them. Yet, many of us will say that we've found ourselves in this adversarial relationship with our parents, which is really concerning. So it really have to ask that if it's not parents and it's not schools, who is it? And I would contend to you that the sands that have drifted through this hourglass have been placed there by the media. I think that there is, I do a little bit of media talking about educational issues, and I certainly don't get called very often by the media to talk about, we're wondering, Adam, if you've got any good news stories about school where families and schools are working together. There's far more mileage for the media in conflict, and so they place us in conflict. And they will beam stories into your family's lounge rooms this week about, the schools that have lost the plot because of this has gone wrong, and the parents are outraged and they didn't go in for a conversation. They decided to ring, a current affair to try and deal with it effectively. And they will equally beam stories into our lounge rooms as educators, saying don't trust families, because we've found a few nutters that are throwing rocks at each other at 1:30 in the morning, and somebody videoed it and sold us the footage for $3,000. So we're getting constantly bombarded, little grains of sand, every day, every week, with messages that we shouldn't trust each other. And I think over a period of about 30 years or so, that trust has genuinely eroded and genuinely changed the partnership to the point where it might not even in a lot of cases be a partnership at all. It might be it might be far more adversarial than that, which is what we're here today to try and fix. What we need to do, I guess, first of all, is to send messages out there that are counter to those little negative drops of sand that are going out there all the time, for no other reason than what we're trying to do is to reposition teachers and school leaders as being experts and professionals. I actually contend that across that 30-year period that I've spoken about, that there's been no profession, none, zero, that have that has taken a hit in terms of its status like being a teacher. And I'd like to do something about that. I contend the first thing we need to do is to stop talking about the boring operational things that anybody could do and talk about the wonderful expertise that we deploy every single day, the stuff that nobody else can do. And that's when I think we really start to get some traction in the partnership. Because it's true that we really want to, in our lives, if we want parents to trust us, then we trust experts. So, there's a reason that when you go to the doctors, that the doctor has all their qualifications framed and up on the wall. It's because they want you to see their expertise so that you don't question their judgment. And so what we need to do is to make sure that other people are seeing and hearing our expertise incredibly regularly if we wish to do something about that. And I guess that brings me to my next point here in framing up what we're going to try and achieve today, And that's about who's going to save us. If the issue is the media, should we not then be lobbying to change the media and fix them up? And I think that unfortunately the media are not going to come and take us off the tracks here. Tracy Grimshaw is not about to save us when it comes to our plight about only conflict in schools between parents and schools being highlighted. And I was talking about this very concept not so long ago with someone who's a communications expert, has absolutely no connection to schools. And I said, so what do you reckon? If you were going to run an organisation like a school where you've got, you know, potentially hundreds of stakeholders involved and invested in the work that you're doing, what would be the one big message that you would give? And he said, you have to communicate, communicate, and communicate, even when you've got nothing to communicate. And I said, what do you mean when you've got nothing to communicate? And he said, the one thing about schools that we need, that he thinks they do wrong, and look, he's, you know, again, just like everybody else who thinks they're an expert in schools just because they went to school or they're the parent of school-age children. He said, the one thing that drives me crazy is all they really tend to talk to me about is what's already on their calendar. And if there's nothing on the calendar, he said, they've kind of got nothing to say. And so his message was that what he believed is that when there's nothing on the calendar to talk about, and I would contend that the calendar should come second to this anyway, but when there's nothing on the calendar to talk about what you hold to be critically important. You know, write an editorial in your newsletter, send a video message about what really matters at your school, unpack one of your school's values in terms of behavioural terms for people. You know, really send a strong message about what our expertise and what the important stuff is, so that we don't fight over the little stuff. Who will save us? Not the media. It's going to be us. We're going to have to do this ourselves, and it won't even really come if you're working in the government sector. It's not likely to come from the government. If you're in the independent sector, it's not likely to come from your board or from your representative body, because they really can only do what's popular. So what we need to do is to fix this problem from the ground up, which means one school at a time, your school. You know, deciding that what we're going to do is to communicate effectively, and we're going to communicate about what's critically important to us. Okay, so that's me framing up in terms of content. Framing you up in terms of your participation today is that I want to acknowledge that this whole concept of bringing schools and parents back together and putting them on the same page, improving the partnership, deepening the relationship, doing it in multiple schools such that we change multiple sectors and regions and jurisdictions across Australia is a rather large goal. And to think that I could get it done in a 1-hour webinar is possibly the height of arrogance. So what I'm going to do today is just fly. I'm just going to try and give you some key messages that I think really underpin what we need to do here to get things going. I'm going to bring in some work that's been done by SchoolStream in terms of being able to accelerate those messages reaching the ears of the people you need them to reach. So to that point, you may feel that you're overeating a bit today. You may leave today not really knowing where to start. Hang in there. What I'm going to do at the end of today is tell you exactly what you can do to try and be assisted in making that start something very meaningful for you. So it may feel that you've got that I've overindulged, I've eaten way too much feeling about you today. Don't panic, don't panic. Just go for the ride here. Remember also that you don't need to take too many notes as you're going here. You've got the slide deck available to you to download, and we're happy to also send you a recording of this webinar so you can go back to those things those key points that you might want to visit. So today, can I just encourage you to sit back, relax, participate if you think you can. I'll talk about that in a minute, and really just make the most of the hour that you've put aside. And I want you to remember that in your participation today, that this really is your show, and that there are a couple of ways that you can join the circus today. Number one is that you can put your hand up. So that means that you've got something to say, or ask. So we'll try and keep the conversation very civil today and not make it a big blue. But you know what? I really would love, I got a couple of emails from principals leading up to this webinar who were saying, oh, what I'm really looking for is examples. And I think that if you've got a question about your school, or that says, oh, well, we're trying to deal with this problem, or, you know, we're thinking of tackling it this way, I think that you're going to be of service to all of the other people who are in the webinar today. So I really want to encourage you that you can find that little tab, that little button that says that with the palm of a hand on it, and you can put your hand up, and we will unmute you. and hear what exactly it is that you've got to say. I'm going to keep an eye on my class today, see if there's a hand up. Verity, I noticed that your hand is up at the moment, so I'll give you just a few seconds just in case that's an accidental hand up, but if it's still there in a minute or two, I'm going to defer to you and get you involved as our very first participant today, which is very cool. It was an accidental one, Verity, the hand's down. Thank you very much. The other way that you can interact today is through the question box. And so if you do have a message or a question, two reasons you might participate through the question box. Number one is because I've raised a point that you want to ask a question about or make a comment on. That's absolutely cool. I'll keep an eye on that and try to address those at the next chance that I can. And secondly, if you're having any tech issues today, the amazing Chris is, as usual, in the background. Our business manager at Real Schools, Chris, is there. And if you're having any issues just with how you access, or if it's sound or the way the webinar's looking today, that happens from time to time with this GoToWebinar platform. Make sure that you chuck a note in there. Chris is really good at being able to help you to make sure that you're not missing out as we go. Okay, so what I really like to do when I'm running a GoToWebinar is to find out, first of all, who's in the room. So I want to know, to keep the circus theme going, I want to know who you are. So first of all, could you have a bit of a look at the screen here and let me know who it is that you are? If you're a system leader, if you're a PRIN or an AP, pop that, tick that little box there. If you're a current or aspiring person in that senior or leading teacher sort of bracket, then tick that one. If you're a teacher, and I know from having a look at some of the registrations that we've got some admin and business managers that are, I'm never very good at doing this sort of accent, but into house today. So if that's you, I really encourage you to let us know, because I'm going to try to take this information and differentiate a little bit and make sure that I'm hitting the mark for the majority of people who are in the room today. And this is really interesting to me as we're moving through, as I'm seeing these results come up. I'm going to give you just a few more seconds because I like to get the vote out to about 80%. We're at 74 now. So if it's you, you've got just a few more seconds to make your vote to let us know what role you're in. And that's probably close enough. Yes, we've ticked over 80. Wonderful. I'll close that poll. I'll actually share the results with you so that you can see here. We've got half the people in the room in that administration type role, which doesn't surprise me given the topic that we've got today. And we've also got a good representation in terms of school leadership, either currently in the role or aspiring to that. Okay, I'm going to try and keep that in mind as we get cracking here. And then what I'd like to do is to make sure that I also hide those results. I also solve very real world problems for your school today. Again, keeping the circus theme going. It's a good friend of mine has a wonderful expression. She says, "It's not my circus, not my monkey," so she doesn't get herself involved in things that aren't of concern to her. I wonder if you've heard that one too. So what I'm going to do is launch one more poll. So this one is just to find out what your monkeys are. What are you here for? What are you trying to get out of today? Is it because you have an issue with parents not knowing what's going on in the school? I wrote a newsletter last week that was about how we sent a note home about this, was the headline, and I got a reasonable response to that. Is it about what to say and how to say it? Is it just how to get that messaging right? Is it dealing effectively with parent resistance and complaint? Is it around today, are you here to try and find out what are the new and better ways to reach parents about what really matters? Or are you looking today for examples from other schools, or templates that you can take away that are about how you can successfully change parent communication in your school? So give that I'll just give that another 15 or 20 seconds or so, because this is important information for me. And I'm looking to get the vote out to about 80%, so I've got a genuine indication of what's really happening in the room for people today. And I can see the data progressing. I can see a genuine theme starting to emerge, which I find very, very interesting. And now that we're right out there at 80%, I will close that and share the results with you so that you can see as well. And we're looking for new and better ways to reach parents about what matters. So more than half the people out of the 5 options have chosen that, which I find very, very interesting. And then we'll try and give you some examples of schools that have gotten this right. So we've definitely got that as part of the program for today as well. Thank you. That gives me a really clear indication of where I need to take today. So I'll head back into my presentation here. Let's get cracking. I've got a bit of a master model. When it comes to working with parents, I genuinely believe that there are three components at play, and only when we have all three components do we get fire. So you know that if you're a science teacher in the room today, that there are three components that you need for fire to exist, and they are fuel, oxygen, and heat. Without one of those, the whole thing just doesn't go. So I tend to label those elements in terms of three key things that schools need to keep in mind to be able to message effectively. So the first one's message, that's the oxygen for me. And what that's about is being on point with those two big agendas. And they're still the two big agendas that parents send their kids to school for. While they might get distracted by the current affairs of the world into thinking that, what I really need to complain about is, NAPLAN or, prices at the canteen or, when are swimming lessons or, what the lollipop lady said to me after school or whatever it may be, the peripheral stuff. And the truth is when you stop and in a moment of clarity give parents the opportunity to actually ask, to say, why do they send their kids to school? Sorry, I'm just checking. Brenda, I've got you noted there as wanting to tick new and better ways as well. Bear with me while I keep checking this to see what we're doing there. While parents, can sometimes become distracted, the truth is that they still send their kids to school for two key reasons. Number one is that they want them to get a great education, and there's two components to that these days. It's about not only what we teach them in the hope that it'll be relevant, and that's really hard these days because we have no idea what jobs these kids are going to be emerging into. We've got a rough idea of the skills they'll need, but we really don't know what the jobs are that they're going to be doing. But what we do know is that they're going to need to know how to, and it's even better if they can learn how to love learning. So their positive regard for learning and their belief that they are a good learner is something that we really need to foster. And we need to tell people exactly how we're doing that. The second reason that parents are sending their kids to school is still that they hope they'll be safe. They hope that they'll be in an environment that nurtures them, that looks after them. And in a way, I guess my heading for that is that I believe they're sending their kids to school in the hope that we will partner with them in turning them into good citizens. So those broad, those heart, those feelings type intentions are still there. There's just a bit of distraction. And so what we need to do when we're messaging, when thinking about what are the messages we're sending out, is make it about great teaching and learning, and also about showing parents how it is that we're committing to citizen building. So talk to them about how we foster great engagement. Talk to them about how we deal with challenging behaviours and conflict. Talk to them about how we are countering bullying. Talk to them about the culture and the values that you're looking to try and cultivate within your school. And don't get distracted to taking your key communication devices and using them only to communicate boring operational stuff. The second element of our communications fire here is the channel that we use. And that means just pondering for a second, what are the means that we're using to get message out into the community? And there are two traditional devices that we've used, and that's the newsletter and the assembly. And I'm not going to tell you today that you should abandon those. I still think that they're messages that they still think they're devices that are valuable because they reach some people. The problem is that there are now more devices that we need to use. And I'm not talking here about but having to communicate so often and so regularly and so, having to produce new content all the time. What I am saying is that if we can we take the methodology of create once and deliver often, but send that message out there through different channels so that we reach them? I think that's hugely important. And then the third one is the volume. And I don't talk volume in terms of screaming at assembly. What I am saying is that, are we communicating regularly enough? Are we getting that message out there with regularity such that people know that we're serious about it? And that's hugely important. But you know what? I think that sometimes for schools we can get 2 of these in place, but then we forget that there's another, and just we haven't maintained, we haven't kept these 3 key elements in place when we've developed something like a communications plan, and we end up working in a space that might be in the overlap there. So for instance, if you're in that overlap between volume and message, where you've got that bit right, we're communicating regularly and we're communicating about the right stuff, but we haven't actually reached enough channels, then we're kind of a bit uninteresting. There's a healthy disregard for schools that don't engage with social media, or that haven't gone and got themselves a really fantastic, easy to use, high functioning, user friendly app that people can actually communicate through. And we kind of go, really, I've got to read another newsletter if I want to find out what's going on. And then if we head over to the other side and we look at the overlap between the message and channel, which means that we've got the message right and we're communicating it through multiple different channels, but the regularity or the volume of the messages that we're sending out is too low, then we're kind of unconvincing. To be told once something is kind of, yeah, okay. But if you keep messaging around the same thing, and as much as they drive me absolutely bonkers, our politicians are very good at this, aren't they? If they're on campaign and they've got a slogan, then they're going to say it over and over and over again in multiple, even within like one press conference. They'll be repeating that message over and over and over again, to the point where you go, wow, he really believes this, doesn't he? And it could be absolute garbage, but he believes it nonetheless. So we have to be convincing in our messages by getting them out there with regularity. And then the third one that's really important is that space between volume and channel, where we're communicating regularly and we're doing it through multiple means and really reaching them where they are, but our message is off. And what that sends a message, unfortunately, is that we're untrustworthy. It's like we've got something to hide, because we won't talk about the real educative purpose. We won't talk about those 2 big things. And we can't fall for the trap of thinking that because we've communicated something once, or even that we've communicated it regularly, that it's and we've communicated it through the app or through whatever it is, the channels that you've got. We can't fall for the trap of thinking that we can sheep dip people. It's only when the messages are really clear and on point that people will develop a high level of trust in our expertise, which is so important in terms of people's willingness to listen to our message. So this is the master model that sits behind a few bits of handy advice that I want to provide you with today. The first thing I want to say today is I want you in your communications to be a lot more like Bon Jovi. And that doesn't mean you have to wear a lovely pair of tan, skin-tight strides like John Bon Jovi is here, and a lovely brown knit as well. What it means is you have to be clever about what has kept Bon Jovi as a highly successful, not just a band, but a business, a brand across the world for a really long time. And so let's say, okay, if a 21st century communications expert were to take over Bon Jovi, and if they'd done what they had done with Bon Jovi and keeping them relevant despite the really weird stuff that they produced back in the 80s, if that person that runs their business were to be dropped into your exec team, what's the strategy that they would use? And I think what we need to do is to consider sometimes that, for instance, Bon Jovi, if they want to sell out a stadium, they don't just announce the tour. That's not the direction that Bon Jovi go in. What they do is first of all is, just checking in on my questions there. The first thing they do is they ask radio stations to play old Bon Jovi songs. They re-familiarise people with the Bon Jovi message. The second thing they do is they release a new song and they get it into high rotation on the same stations that they've been playing the old stuff on. The third thing they do, and only at this point where people have gone, I remember them, I'm familiar with them now. The third thing they do is they announce the tour. And at this point, the die-hard fans and the newly reminded fans are more likely to go and buy tickets, but they don't buy out enough to put 70,000 people in a stadium. So they know that there's a next phase to go to, which is to get back onto those radio stations and to give radio interviews. The next stage in the Bon Jovi publicity machine is to engage social media. So they know that that's where their fans are. And so what they do is they choose the channels within social media where those fans are congregating. They get into their Facebook groups. They look at where the other groups are that are related to the to rock and roll and to you know, glam rock, and they make sure that they're present there. They might release a new video clip and put that out on YouTube. They might release a new video interview and get that to go viral through their Facebook through their Facebook groups. So they become very present there. And it's only then that, you know, as people are going along through each of these phases, that, you know, they might be getting 30-40% of people, and then on the next one 20 or 30% more buy some tickets, and then with the next one, when that video comes out, another 10% of people buy tickets, and then at the next one, when they actually go and put the posters up under the train line bridges and things like that, people, another 10% buy their tickets. And then we're only right at the end, and you'll notice that for concerts, they really only get to television advertising a couple of weeks before the concert, because the truth is they're just trying to sell the last 10% of tickets. What they understand is that there's no one communication means that is going to catch everybody. We've got to use more and more channels. We've got to be where they are, and we've got to be there with such regularity that we give small percentages of people every single time the chance to step in and to demonstrate the behaviour that we're hoping that they'll demonstrate. And in this case, it's to buy a ticket. In a school's instance, it's to understand our key messages and to trust us. And so we need to be regular, and we need to use multiple channels, not just the traditional ones that existed for us. I'm just going to stop for a second because I just want to have a look at the question box for a moment and just check whether we've got a hand up or not too. Sally's got a question here about my parents, predominantly time-poor professionals, want to be able to email teachers directly 24/7. My comments are around email. I think, unfortunately, what we do around email is we train people how to treat us. I spoke recently to a teacher who was a young teacher, and he had trained his parents by replying regularly that that email was an immediate communications medium, and so he was, you know, having parents complain if they hadn't answered his email at 8 o'clock the next morning that they'd sent at 11 p.m. the night before. And the first way that we need to make sure that that doesn't happen to us is to never ever answer emails outside of business hours. So we need to train people that email is not an immediate communications tool, and if there's something that needs to be discussed immediately, that would require you coming down to the school or making a phone call. Those are the immediate communication means, and we need to let people know quite explicitly that email isn't something that will be answered immediately, but email is something that allows us to do two things. It allows us to answer in detail, and it allows us to answer in a one-to-many. That's the advantage of email, is one-to-many and detail. And it shouldn't be that email is in your school encouraged as an immediate communications tool, because it's not urgent. Email is for communicating things that are important and not urgent. Hope that answers your question in some way, Sally. The second thing I want you to do is to, I sit here and cringe as I provide this advice for you, I'm so sorry, is to be more like Andrew Boldt, and I am really sorry about that. But one thing about Andrew Boldt, if you're perhaps not in Victoria like me, one of the things that you may be aware of is that Andrew Boldt is a controversial conservative writer for the Herald Sun, and a lot of his work goes nationally on television on a show called The Boldt Report on Sky News. And I must say that nearly everything that Andrew Boldt writes I disagree with. But what I will give him credit for is that he has such strong conviction about the way that he writes it. It's quite ridiculous because he views himself as being an expert on everything, but his headlines in particular are so forceful and so confident that, you know what, I know that I'm going to disagree. I know that I'm going to shake my head. I know that I'm going to be frustrated and annoyed with what he's got to write. But when I read that headline as I check out the Herald Sun website in the morning, part of me goes, I wonder what he said this time, and I want to go and have a look. I want to engage, even though I'm going to disagree. Boldt throws rocks. Boldt disagrees. Boldt stands firm in a position that might not be popular with some people. And I think that the lesson for us to learn in the messages that we send out is you don't necessarily need to be beige. We need to stand out rather than fit in. So if I was going to encourage you to make one key change from here, it would be to assume a strong expertise about education. And then, you know what, if you're going to make one decision from today, it would be to go and have a look at your school's newsletter and take off the masthead from it, take off the title at the top, which is usually Prin's report. Take off Principal's report, and make sure that any time your principal is going to be writing a message out to the community, that it has a headline on it that gets my attention. It gets me interested. So principal's report does not get me interested in the fact that we could be celebrating some really fantastic gains in that plan in the areas that you targeted in your strategic plan. But a headline that says, Frankston Primary School stands out in NAPLAN in maths, well, you might perhaps got my attention about what's going on there. So I really want you to think about standing strong in a position and writing a headline that gets people's attention. The next thing I want you to do is to make sure that you're speaking to the neocortex of the people in your community and not the limbic system. The neocortex is responsible for all of our thinking. The limbic system is responsible for all of our feeling. And unfortunately, this goes to the idea of parent complaints too, that when parents come in and complain, we tend to defend, we tend to push back or argue with them. And at this point, arguing with someone who's already angry and out of line tends to make the whole situation a lot worse. So I tend to let people have their rant, whether it's in writing, whether it's on the phone or whether it's in person. I'm really determined to let them go until they are absolutely exhausted. Because what happens in that moment is they tend to at least feel that they've been listened to, and that feeling of being listened to is a positive one, which means they become less negative and emotional and more likely to switch back from the feelings part of their brain, the limbic system, to the thinking part of their brain, their neocortex. And that's the bit that I want to talk to. So I want you to get skilled at handling parent complaints, not by cutting them off and saying, hang on, I just want to clear that up for a moment because what you've said there is completely wrong. It's just let them go. Take notes, tell them to keep going, tell them to give you more detail, tell them that you need to know more, ask them what you would like them to do about it, ask them if there's anything else that I need to know in this situation, and let them really get it off their chest. And what that does is like I said, buys you that listening that allows people to get back into their thinking space. We all do our best work when we're thinking straight. And so allow people to have their emotions. You can't save them from them. Allow people to own them. Allow them to express them, and then get back into the work that you need to do to actually solve a problem that might exist in your school. Now, the next one is a really interesting one. This is one I'll talk. This is the one that, for the reason that I've spoken a fair bit about parent communication before, and talked a lot to the notion of be where they are. But I talk from an uneducated position. I talk from only the reference point of my own experience, which I frankly don't think is good enough for all of you. We really need to have some expertise in on this. So the reason that I've partnered with SchoolStream today for this is because I want you to give some serious consideration to having an app for your school that allows you to communicate about those important things. I certainly have investigated a lot of apps and a lot of communication, text messaging services and student management systems, school management systems and things like that as well. And I've been loath to recommend any to anybody because they really are looking to communicate more of the operational or only the operational. Whereas the stuff I love about what SchoolStream have been able to put together is that it allows me to communicate the important as well as the operational. And I think that's hugely of huge benefit. And it's, while I want to, that schools that actually say we want to communicate in the spaces where parents are hugely the ones that are really stepping forward in terms of their relationship between home and school. The recent bit of research that I saw was that They surveyed a lot of parents and asked them if they read the school newsletter, and about 7.8% of them said yes. Now, using Bon Jovi's theory, we'll take that, 7.8, 7.8. But what we need to do is to get that message out to them where they are. You'll notice in the handout section for this webinar, there's a couple that you can download the slides from today, but you can also download a school communications report that is a research-backed bit of evidence that Schoolstream have done, and it fascinated me and freaked me out at the same time. There were things in there, particularly, and Amy Johnston from Schoolstream will talk to you about this in a few minutes, but there was a part from in there that really got my attention. It was page 8 of the report, which says that it asks people, do you use your smartphone while? And I just made a couple of quick notes that, 80% of people say they use their smartphone while they're at work. 68% said they use it while watching TV. I'm guilty. 51% of people said they use it while they're eating at home, while they're at the dinner table. And then we got down to 25% of people said they use it while crossing the road and driving, which kind of freaks me out completely and has me frightened to go back out onto the road at the moment. But what it says to me is that if we're going to be where they are on their phones. They are on their smartphones. And this even ties in a little bit, Sally, to your question, which was about, how can we communicate with them such that they don't think that email's the only way that we're going to respond with them, that they can get immediate communications that way. That if you've got a good app, and one that makes life easier rather than feels like something additional you need to do. One of the quotes from the report that I really like is that it's not one more thing to do. This is out of a testimonial. It was the only thing you have to do because it connects and integrates so effectively with your student management systems. And so I just want to recommend that really highly to you, is to step into the spaces where they are. This goes to the notion of channel, of being where they are, and even schools that step into that space. One of our partner schools at Cannanock Primary School has gone from a position where there was only one. There was a Facebook group set up for their school, but it was run only by parents, and what they did was say, well, we want to be present in that space because they're there and we've got no say in what they're talking about. We're not a part of that conversation. So if you wanted an example even from a school that's gone about the Facebook way of communicating with people, I can't recommend more highly that you go and have a look at Cannanock's, the work that we've done with Cannanock around that. And I recommend that you like their page as well and see the way that they're going about getting positive message out in the community. But I want you to do that trick, though, of not just looking at the message, but I want you to be thinking about what the message is doing for them, how that's actually building a genuine, thicker, more partner-like relationship between home and school rather than driving people apart. Hugely important. And then the last little bit of content for today that I want to bring your attention to is to just the idea of making it really easy and safe for parents to communicate with schools. And I'm going to do this through one brief story. A school that I worked with quite a while ago now had a real challenge, and what they'd identified was that their parent communication and involvement was low. Their stakeholder data from the parents was that they don't feel very connected or involved in the school. They struggled to get school council reps, and in particular what they noticed from an observational point of view was that any of the parents involved in the school were all mums. There was basically no dad involvement in the school, and they said they wanted to do something about that. And I asked them what they had done first. And the first thing they said, well, we tried to run some sessions at the school, some events that involved parents, kids as teachers evenings and things like that. And I said, how'd that go? And they said, oh, no dad showed up. I said, okay. So what'd you do next? And they said, well, we tried to run sessions where we put the right bait on, and they'd run a sausage sizzle and hope that wonderful waft of the smell of a barbecue would pervade the community and that the dads would come running. And I said, how'd that go? And they said, no one showed up. And I said, what'd you do next? And they said, oh, we had a dad night where we made it explicitly about dads, and there was food involved and there was sport involved and there was showing off the kids' work, and still nobody showed up. And then they'd even gone to the point of doing personalised video invitations to try and get dads down to the school, and still attendance was incredibly low. And it wasn't until we stopped and said, okay, let's talk instead of about what's the next thing we're going to try. Let's talk about what's potentially the theme of what's going wrong. And so we said, who are your dads? Who are the dads that you're trying to engage? What's special about them? What's unique about them? And this was a reasonably low socioeconomic community, and a lot of the dads were tradies. They owned utes. They owned dogs. They hadn't particularly, a lot of them, finished their formal schooling, didn't have a particularly high regard for school. In fact, school reminded them of a place where they'd failed in their life. And so what we started to discover was that inviting them into an environment where they just weren't comfortable, and it felt like it was a reminder that their history, what wasn't great there, was a place that they just didn't want to be. So the school decided that we would run a dad and dog breakfast barbecue at the park on a Saturday morning, at the park down the road from the school. And I'm really glad that I wasn't there for the barbecue and just for the brainstorming of this idea, because at the barbecue breakfast, 61 dads and dogs showed up to get an egg and bacon roll for breakfast. I can only imagine the mayhem. But what I love about the story more than anything is that schools. Is that the principal of the school told me a story later about a group of dads that sort of seemed to splinter off from the group and have this intense conversation. And what they talked about was how crappy they thought the early childhood playground at the school was. And they all agreed that through their various trades that they could source some materials. The principal said she didn't ask too many questions about how they sourced these materials. And about 3 weeks later, there was a working bee at the school on a Saturday morning that these dads organised themselves, about 8 to 10 of them. And her estimation was that the work they did for the school at that time was somewhere around that $80,000 to $100,000 worth of work if she'd gone and contracted it out. And I think that is a wonderful, wonderful story. And what it's about is trying to make it easy and safe for people to communicate with the school. And what do you know, they don't just listen, they actually step up and start to do things, which is very, very cool. So I'm just going to move on a little bit here. I want to introduce Amy. I'm noting that we've got a question or two, so I'm going to read those while Amy speaks here. Amy Johnson from Schoolstream is with us, I think. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unmute Amy, and let's just be sure that technology is going to help us out here. Amy, are you there?
I'm here, Adam.
Wonderful. So what I'm going to do, Amy, is because I'm just not going to do this justice because I got too freaked out by what people do when they're actually using their devices. So I'm going to invite you for a minute, Amy, just to tell people, look, in a nutshell, I guess, why they need to download this School Communication Insiders report and what they'll get out of that, and having to think about what they could do by working with Schoolstream. So over to you, Amy, for just a couple of minutes.
All right. Thanks, Adam. Hi, everyone. As Adam mentioned, my name is Amy, and I'm a product specialist here at Schoolstream. So the report we're going to share with you was released in May this year, was really highly regarded, actually. So we wanted here to really dig deeper into the school communication landscape and find out exactly how schools were communicating with their parents, what methods were being used, and just how effective these channels really were. So we surveyed literally hundreds of principals, managers, directors, IT, administration teams. We looked at the diversity of modern families, common frustrations for schools, and expectations really from both. Of course, we looked at our relationship with our mobile devices and you know, the very real need for active, real-time, instant communication in schools. So I'm sure you'll find great insights in the report. We're really passionate about the education sector. We all know that communication is absolutely key. So look, please feel free to call us here at Schoolstream with any questions or queries you might have about the report, or even just to give us some feedback, and our number is 0280745633. So thank you, good reading, and back to you, Adam.
No worries. Hey, Amy, while I've got you online,
Yeah.
one of the things that I like about SchoolStream is that its ability to integrate with SMSs in the school. And so we've got a question here from Kate about their schools using Compass, and she's asking about, do we know of an app that easily integrates with this to help communicate rather than using separate platforms? I guess Kate's tapping into that idea of, it's the one thing we have to do rather than an additional thing to do. Are you able to speak to that at all, Amy, about how that can work?
Yeah, sure. I mean, integration is a funny word, but what we find, I mean, with our platform and most other app platforms, it's more of a complementary the platform for your student management system. So the way that, again, the word integration, but what we do is we're able to keep everything in the one place, including your parent portal of Compass, of Central. To give you an idea, 98% of our clients who use SchoolStream also use a student management system of some kind. How they will, in commas, integrate with SchoolStream is housing the portal within the app. So parents actually facilitates more parents going to the portal through the app than they would on a desktop alone. You can send out instant reminders, push notifications to let your parents know to go to the portal. For example, Term 3 reports available now. Please visit the portal, which they can do from the device. Calendars are also able to be synced with our events category in the app. So in terms of that, it complements by providing that active, real-time and very convenient access to your management system.
Thanks, Amy. Much appreciate that. I'm hoping that answered your question. I'll just answer the question. I'm just going to mute you, Amy, so that you can sit back and relax and take a deep breath.
Thanks, Adam.
No worries. Thank you again, Amy. Really appreciate your contribution there. Okay, so let's finish things up. Next steps, what do you need to do? The first one is at least download the slide deck from today, so you've got a little reminder of those key, the fundamental master model that sits behind it and a few things that can really make a difference for you. Second thing you need to do is, it's sitting there absolutely free for you, is that insider's report from SchoolStream. So please grab that before the webinar ends in just a few minutes. Just download that really easy PDF that you can print off and take to your next exec or administration meeting to find out what you need to do there. If you'd like one of us to have a chat to you, if you'd like us at Real Schools about the work that we've been doing, I noticed that since I mentioned Kannanook that Michael Block, the principal's online, which usually means that there's a few people at Kannanook online today, so g'day Blocky and all the team out there. If you'd like to chat about the partnerships that we have with schools like them, then please just in that question box just put chat RS there, and we'll reach out to you. And if you'd like to chat with them at SchoolStream about the app, just put chat SS in that block there, and rather than having to sort of jot down that number that Amy really expressly read out, if you think that's going to be of benefit to you, just put chat SS in that box there. And Amy will get in touch with you, or someone from the team at SchoolStream will, and see what we can do to try and help you out with that as well. So I think that brings us close to the end. Look, next month I'm really excited because I get a month off. But what we're doing, our other director at Real Schools here, Ryan Martin, is going to run the webinar next month, and Ryan has an extensive history of working successfully with schools around being able to, Ryan just distinguishes it as being evidence informed rather than evidence driven.